In the unforgiving mountains of Afghanistan, where death whispers through every valley and shadows hold secrets that could save or destroy entire missions, the most elite warriors on Earth learned that sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected places. This is the true story of how a single moment of recognition between strangers changed the course of a deadly operation, where split-second decisions meant the difference between going home alive or in a flag-draped coffin. What happened in those crucial minutes when trained killers met an unlikely ally would challenge everything these Navy SEALs thought they knew about warfare, loyalty, and the thin line between enemy and friend. Some battles are won not with the biggest guns or the most advanced technology, but with the courage of those who refuse to remain invisible when heroes need them most. The grass was tall that day, and from it rose a guardian angel with an auto-sniper rifle. The helicopter blades cut through the thin mountain air like whispers of death, carrying 8 Navy SEALs deeper into Taliban territory than any American forces had ventured in months. Staff Sergeant Marcus Rodriguez pressed his face against the small window, watching the jagged peaks of the Hindu Kush mountains slide past in the pre-dawn darkness. Somewhere below in those valleys lived people who wanted nothing more than to see him and his teammates dead. Rodriguez had been in Afghanistan for 11 months now, long enough to know that every mission could be his last, but experienced enough to trust in his training and his brothers beside him. The man next to him, Petty Officer Jake Stevens, was cleaning his rifle for the 3rd time since they'd lifted off from the forward operating base. Stevens always did that when he was nervous, though he'd never admit it. Behind them, the rest of Bravo team sat in focused silence, each man lost in his own thoughts about what lay ahead. The mission briefing had been straightforward, at least on paper. Intelligence had located a high-value target in a remote village nestled between 2 mountain ridges. The target was supposedly a Taliban commander responsible for coordinating attacks against American convoys along the main supply route. The village was small, maybe 30 buildings scattered across a narrow valley floor, with steep slopes on both sides covered in tall grass and scattered rocks. What made this mission different was the terrain. The valley was a natural funnel, with only one way in and one way out, by vehicle. If things went bad, the SEALs would have to fight their way up those steep slopes to reach the extraction point. The satellite images showed the grass on those slopes was shoulder-high in some places, perfect cover for enemies with rifles and rocket-propelled grenades. As the helicopter began its descent toward the landing zone, Rodriguez felt the familiar tightness in his stomach that came before every operation. He'd been doing this for 8 years, since he was 19 years old, and he still got nervous. The difference now was that he'd learned to use that nervousness, to let it sharpen his focus instead of clouding it. The pilot's voice crackled through their headsets. 2 minutes to LZ. Weather's clear, no movement detected on thermals. Rodriguez checked his gear one final time. M4 carbine, loaded with a fresh magazine. 6 more magazines in his vest. Fragmentation grenades, smoke grenades, first aid kit, radio, night vision goggles. Everything exactly where it should be. He looked around at his teammates and saw the same methodical preparation. These were men he'd trained with for years, men whose wives he knew by name, whose children he'd held at unit barbecues. They weren't just fellow soldiers, they were family. The helicopter touched down in a small clearing about 2 kilometers from the target village. The SEALs moved out quickly and quietly, disappearing into the darkness like ghosts. Rodriguez felt his boots sink slightly into the soft earth as they crossed a small stream, the water barely visible in the starlight. The night was cold, maybe 40 degrees, and their breath formed small clouds in the air. They moved in single file, with Rodriguez taking point. Behind him came Stevens with the radio, then their team leader, Lieutenant Paul Mitchell, followed by the rest of the squad. Each man maintained a 10-meter interval, close enough to provide mutual support, but far enough apart that a single grenade or burst of automatic fire couldn't take out multiple team members. The approach to the village took them through a series of terraced fields that had probably been carved into the mountainside decades or even centuries earlier. The stone walls that separated the terraces provided good cover, but they also created potential ambush points. Rodriguez paused frequently to scan ahead with his night vision goggles, looking for any sign of movement or heat signatures that might indicate enemy positions. As they got closer to the village, Rodriguez could smell wood smoke from cooking fires and the distinctive odor of livestock. These were normal smells that suggested the village was going about its usual routines, but Rodriguez knew that didn't mean anything. Taliban fighters were experts at blending in with civilian populations, and they could appear and disappear like smoke when they needed to. The village was laid out much as the satellite photos had shown. Small mud brick houses with flat roofs scattered along both sides of a dirt road that ran through the valley floor. Most of the buildings were dark, though a few showed the faint glow of oil lamps through shuttered windows. Dogs barked occasionally in the distance, but nothing that suggested the animals had detected the approaching SEALs. Lieutenant Mitchell's voice whispered through their radio headsets. Bravo 1, this is Bravo 6. Target building is the large compound at the far end of the village, just before the road starts climbing toward the pass. 2 stories, walled courtyard, guards expected at the main gate. Rodriguez acknowledged with 2 clicks of his radio transmit button. He could see the building now, maybe 400 meters ahead. It was indeed larger than the others, with high walls surrounding a central courtyard. Light spilled from several windows on both floors, and Rodriguez could make out at least 2 figures moving around near what appeared to be the main entrance. The plan was simple but required precise timing. Stevens and 2 other SEALs would position themselves on the slope above the village to provide overwatch and cover the team's withdrawal if things went wrong. Rodriguez and the remaining team members would approach the target building from 2 directions, breach the walls, and secure the high-value target for extraction. As they got into position, Rodriguez felt the weight of responsibility that came with every operation. These weren't just military objectives they were pursuing. They were trying to save the lives of American soldiers and Afghan civilians who were being killed by the man they hoped to capture tonight. Every roadside bomb that wasn't planted, every convoy that wasn't attacked, every school that wasn't burned down because this Taliban commander was in custody instead of planning operations represented lives saved. The wind picked up slightly, rustling the tall grass on the slopes above them. Rodriguez paused to listen, trying to distinguish between natural sounds and anything that might indicate human movement. The grass was thick up there, thick enough to hide a dozen men with weapons. He made a mental note to keep one eye on those slopes throughout the operation. Stevens and his Overwatch team began their climb up the eastern slope, moving carefully through the terraced fields toward their planned observation post. Rodriguez watched them go, knowing that their success might depend on how well Stevens could see and respond to threats from that elevated position. The tall grass would provide concealment for the Overwatch team, but it would also limit their field of view. As Rodriguez prepared to move toward the target building, he thought about his family back home in Texas. His wife Maria was probably getting their daughter ready for school right now, dealing with the morning routine that he'd missed for most of the past year. His daughter Sophia was 7 years old, and she'd grown 3 inches since his last leave. Sometimes he wondered if she'd even recognize him when he finally came home. But those thoughts were a luxury he couldn't afford right now. Rodriguez pushed them aside and focused on the mission at hand. Somewhere in that building ahead was a man who had American blood on his hands, and Rodriguez and his team were going to make sure he answered for it. The lieutenant's voice came through the radio again. All elements. This is Bravo 6. Overwatch is moving into position. Assault elements prepare to advance on my signal. Rodriguez felt his heart rate increase slightly as adrenaline began flowing through his system. This was the moment when months of training and planning came down to execution. Everything they'd learned, everything they'd practiced, every contingency they'd discussed, was about to be tested against the harsh reality of combat. He checked his rifle one more time and prepared to move forward into the unknown dangers that waited in the shadows of the Afghan village. The first sign of trouble came from Stevens on the Overwatch position. His voice was tense but controlled as it crackled through Rodriguez's earpiece. Bravo 6, this is Overwatch. I've got movement in the grass approximately 200 meters up the western slope. Multiple heat signatures, looks like they're trying to get into flanking positions. Lieutenant Mitchell's response was immediate. Copy that, Overwatch. Can you get eyes on? How many are we talking about? Rodriguez froze in his position behind a low stone wall, his rifle trained toward the target building while his mind processed this new information. The western slope was supposed to be empty. Intelligence had indicated that the Taliban forces in this area were concentrated in the village itself, not positioned in the surrounding hills. Either their intelligence was wrong, or they'd walked into something much bigger than a simple capture operation. Stevens came back on the radio after what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 30 seconds. Bravo 6, I count at least 6 individuals moving through the grass in a coordinated pattern. They're approximately 400 meters from your position, but closing slowly. Military-style movement, not civilians. Rodriguez felt his stomach tighten. 6 fighters in the hills meant this was likely an ambush. The Taliban had known they were coming, or at least suspected that someone might come for their commander. The fact that these fighters were positioned on the western slope meant they could fire down into the village and catch the SEALs in a crossfire if the assault team tried to withdraw. Mitchell's voice came through the radio again, and Rodriguez could hear the tension beneath the professional calm. All elements, this is Bravo 6. Mission parameters have changed. We have hostile forces in Overwatch positions on the western slope. Assault elements, hold your positions while we assess the situation. Rodriguez pressed himself lower behind the stone wall and scanned the target building through his rifle scope. The two gods he'd spotted earlier were still visible near the main entrance, but now he wondered how many more fighters might be hidden inside the compound. If the Taliban had positioned an ambush team in the hills, they'd probably reinforced the target building as well. The sound of automatic weapons fire erupted from the direction of Stevens's position, shattering the quiet night air. Rodriguez's radio immediately came alive with urgent voices. Contact! Contact! Overwatch is taking fire from multiple positions. Bravo 6, this is Overwatch. We're pinned down by at least 3 separate firing positions. Request immediate support. Rodriguez felt the familiar surge of adrenaline and training taking over. His team was under attack and everything else became secondary to that fact. He keyed his radio transmit button. Bravo 6, this is Bravo 1. Request permission to advance on target building and create a diversion. Before Mitchell could respond, the compound erupted in activity. Lights came on in several buildings throughout the village, and Rodriguez could see armed figures moving between the houses. The guards at the target building had disappeared, probably taking cover inside the walls. More concerning, Rodriguez could see muzzle flashes from at least 2 positions on the rooftops of nearby buildings. All elements, we are compromised. Mitchell's voice cut through the chaos. Assault elements advance and secure the target. We finish this mission and get out of here before they can coordinate their response. He vaulted over the stone wall and began moving toward the target compound in a low crouch, using every bit of available cover. Behind him, he could hear his teammates doing the same, their movements coordinated despite the chaos erupting around them. The distance to the compound wall felt like miles instead of the 150 meters it actually was. Rodriguez zigzagged between small outbuildings and stone walls, pausing periodically to return fire at the muzzle flashes he could see on the rooftops. His rifle bucked against his shoulder as he squeezed off controlled bursts, not necessarily trying to hit specific targets, but attempting to keep the enemy fighters from getting accurate shots at his advancing team. Bullets whined overhead and sparked off the stone walls around him. Rodriguez could hear the distinctive crack of AK-47 rounds passing close to his position, mixed with the deeper boom of larger caliber weapons. The Taliban fighters were well armed and positioned, making this advance a deadly gauntlet for the SEALs. When Rodriguez reached the compound wall, he pressed his back against a mud brick and tried to catch his breath. His heart was pounding, and sweat ran down his face despite the cold mountain air. Through his earpiece, he could hear Stevens and the Overwatch team still engaged in their firefight on the eastern slope. The sound of their weapons was almost continuous now, suggesting they were facing significant opposition. Rodriguez's teammate, Petty Officer David Kim, slammed into the wall beside him, breathing heavily.
That was fun, Kim gasped, checking his rifle for damage.
What's the plan for getting through this wall? Rodriguez had been thinking about the same thing. The compound wall was about 8 feet high and topped with razor wire. They had explosives that could blow a hole in the wall, but using them would alert every fighter in the area to their exact position. On the other hand, trying to climb over would leave them exposed to fire from the rooftops. Before Rodriguez could answer, Lieutenant Mitchell's voice came through the radio with new urgency. All elements, be advised we have vehicle movement on the access road leading into the village. Multiple vehicles, headlights visible, estimated time to arrival 15 minutes. We need to complete this mission and reach the extraction point before they arrive. Rodriguez felt his options narrowing rapidly. Vehicle movement meant reinforcements, probably a lot of them. If the SEALs were still in the village when those vehicles arrived, they'd be completely outnumbered and outgunned. The extraction point was on the ridge above the village, a climb of at least 30 minutes through that tall grass where enemy fighters were already positioned. Kim was already preparing the breaching charges they'd need to blow a hole in the compound wall. We go loud and fast, he said, reading Rodriguez's thoughts. Get in, get the target, and get out before those vehicles arrive. Rodriguez nodded, but as he prepared to breach the wall, movement on the western slope caught his attention. Through his night vision goggles, he could see muzzle flashes scattered across the hillside in what appeared to be a coordinated assault on Stevens's position. The Overwatch team was clearly outnumbered and in serious trouble. The sound of Stevens's voice came through the radio, strained and urgent. Bravo 6. Overwatch is taking heavy casualties. We need immediate extraction or reinforcement. Enemy force estimated at 15 to 20 fighters, well-positioned and coordinated. Rodriguez felt the weight of an impossible decision. His mission was to capture or eliminate the high-value target in the compound, but his brothers were dying on that hillside. Military doctrine was clear about not abandoning a mission for emotional reasons, but these weren't just fellow soldiers, they were family. As if reading his thoughts, Mitchell's voice cut through his internal debate. Bravo 1, complete the breach and secure the compound. Overwatch, maintain your positions and continue to engage. Help is coming. Rodriguez hoped the lieutenant knew what he was talking about, because from where Rodriguez stood, it looked like they were on their own in hostile territory, with reinforcements closing in and no clear way out. Kim finished setting the breaching charges and looked at Rodriguez expectantly. Ready when you are, Sergeant. Rodriguez took a deep breath and prepared to breach the compound wall, knowing that whatever they found inside would determine whether any of them made it home alive. The explosion shattered the night silence and sent chunks of mud brick flying in all directions. Rodriguez felt the shockwave in his chest as Kim's breaching charges blew a hole in the compound wall, large enough for 2 men to pass through side by side. Before the dust had even settled, Rodriguez was moving through the opening with his rifle raised, scanning for immediate threats. The courtyard inside was larger than it had appeared from the satellite images, with several smaller buildings arranged around a central open space. Rodriguez could see light spilling from windows in the main house and shadows moving behind what appeared to be curtained windows on the second floor. More importantly, he could see at least 3 armed guards taking cover behind stone planters and low walls within the courtyard itself. Rodriguez dropped to one knee and fired 3 quick shots at the nearest guard, who had been trying to line up a shot with an AK-47. The man went down, but the other 2 guards immediately opened fire, their muzzle flashes lighting up the courtyard like deadly fireworks. Bullets whined past Rodriguez's head and chipped fragments from the wall behind him. Kim came through the breach behind Rodriguez and immediately engaged the second guard, while Rodriguez focused on the third. The firefight was brief but intense, lasting maybe 20 seconds before both remaining guards were down. Rodriguez's ears were ringing from the gunfire in the enclosed space, but he could still hear the ongoing battle on the hillside through his radio earpiece. Stephen's voice was becoming increasingly desperate. Bravo 6. Overwatch is completely pinned down. We've taken 2 casualties and are running low on ammunition. The enemy is attempting to flank our position from both sides. Rodriguez wanted to help his brothers on the hill, but he had his own mission to complete. He signaled for Kim to cover the courtyard while he approached the main house. The building was 2 stories, built in the traditional Afghan style, with thick walls and small windows. Most of the ground floor windows were dark, but Rodriguez could see movement and light on the second floor. As Rodriguez reached the main entrance, he heard voices speaking in Pashto from somewhere inside the building. At least 3 different voices, maybe more, and they sounded agitated. Rodriguez couldn't understand the words, but the tone suggested they were arguing about something, probably what to do about the Americans who had just blown a hole in their wall. Rodriguez tested the door and found it unlocked. He eased it open just enough to peer inside and saw a narrow hallway with stairs leading to the second floor. The voices were coming from upstairs, along with the sound of people moving around rapidly. Someone was definitely trying to escape or prepare for a fight. Kim appeared beside Rodriguez, breathing heavily from the firefight in the courtyard. Building secure down here, he reported quietly, but I can hear vehicles getting closer. We need to move fast.
Rodriguez nodded and started up the stairs,
moving carefully to avoid making noise on the wooden steps. Behind him, Kim followed with his rifle trained up toward the second-floor landing. The voices above became clearer as they climbed, and Rodriguez could distinguish at least 4 different speakers, all male, all sounding increasingly panicked. When Rodriguez reached the second-floor landing, he could see light coming from under a door at the end of the hallway. The voices were definitely coming from that room, and from the sound of it, someone was giving orders while others were gathering equipment or weapons. Rodriguez gestured for Kim to cover the hallway while he approached the door. Through his earpiece, Rodriguez could hear Lieutenant Mitchell coordinating something, but the transmission was broken up by interference. What he could make out wasn't encouraging. Vehicles now estimated at arrival in 8 minutes, Overwatch position completely, immediate extraction required. Rodriguez reached the door and paused to listen. The voices inside had stopped, which meant either they'd heard the SEALs approaching or they'd finished whatever they were discussing. Rodriguez counted to 3 in his head, then kicked the door open and rushed into the room with his rifle raised. The room was larger than he'd expected, clearly serving as some kind of command center. Maps covered one wall, and several radios sat on a long table against another wall. 4 men were in the room, 3 of them reaching for weapons while the 4th, an older man with a grey beard, stood calmly with his hands visible. Rodriguez recognized the bearded man immediately from the mission briefing photos. This was their high-value target, the Taliban commander they'd come to capture. The man looked directly at Rodriguez with steady, intelligent eyes, showing no fear despite the rifle pointed at his chest. "Drop your weapons," Rodriguez shouted in Pashto, one of the few phrases he'd learned during his deployment. Two of the younger men complied immediately, raising their hands and stepping away from their rifles. The third man, however, continued reaching for a pistol on his belt. Kim's rifle cracked once from the doorway, and the man with the pistol spun and fell to the floor. The two surviving guards looked terrified now, their hands raised high above their heads. The Taliban commander remained calm, studying Rodriguez with what appeared to be professional interest. "You are American Special Forces," the commander said in accented but clear English. "I am Commander Mahmoud Hassan. I believe you have come for me." Rodriguez kept his rifle trained on Hassan while signaling for Kim to secure the other two men. "You're under arrest," Rodriguez said. "We're taking you back for questioning about terrorist activities against coalition forces." Hassan nodded, as if this was what he'd expected. "Of course, but I think you may have other problems more immediate than me, yes? I can hear the fighting on the hillside. Your friends are in much trouble." Rodriguez didn't respond to the comment, but Hassan was right. Through the window, Rodriguez could see muzzle flashes scattered across the eastern slope where Stevens and the Overwatch team were fighting for their lives. The sound of gunfire was almost continuous now, and Rodriguez could distinguish the sharp crack of American M4 rifles mixed with the deeper rattle of AK-47s. Kim had flex-cuffed the two guards and was searching them for hidden weapons. "Sergeant, we've got multiple cell phones here, and they were all making calls when we came in. This whole thing might be coordinated from here." Before Rodriguez could respond, Hassan spoke again. "Yes, my young friend is correct. When your helicopters were heard approaching, we sent word to all our friends in the area. They have been waiting for you in those hills for more than 1 hour." Rodriguez felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. If Hassan was telling the truth, then the SEALs hadn't just stumbled into an ambush, they'd walked into a carefully planned trap. The Taliban had known they were coming and had time to position fighters throughout the area. Stevens's voice came through the radio again, weaker now and barely audible over the static. "Bravo 6. Taking heavy fire from all sides. Ammunition critically low. Request immediate. Anyone, please respond." Rodriguez looked out the window again and realized that his brothers on the hillside were about to be overrun. Even if he and Kim could get Hassan to the extraction point, there might not be anyone left to extract. The Overwatch team was the backbone of their escape plan, and they were clearly losing their fight. Hassan followed Rodriguez's gaze toward the hillside battle. "Your friends cannot win," he said matter-of-factly. "They are few, and my fighters are many. Also, the vehicles you hear approaching carry more fighters with heavy weapons. Your mission, it has failed." Rodriguez wanted to tell Hassan he was wrong, but looking at the tactical situation, he wasn't sure he could. The SEALs were outnumbered, low on ammunition, and facing reinforcements that would arrive within minutes. Even if they could fight their way to the extraction point, the helicopter might not be able to land safely with so many enemy fighters in the area. Kim checked his watch and looked at Rodriguez with concern. "Sergeant, those vehicles are going to be here in less than 5 minutes. If we're going to move, it has to be now." Rodriguez made his decision. They would take Hassan and try to fight their way to the extraction point. Maybe they could help Stevens and the Overwatch team on the way, or maybe they'd all die together on that hillside. Either way, they weren't leaving their brothers behind. As Rodriguez prepared to move out with his prisoner, the sound of a heavy machine gun opened up from somewhere on the western slope. The distinctive hammering sound of a .50 caliber weapon echoed across the valley, and Rodriguez could see tracer rounds streaking through the darkness toward the enemy positions that had been engaging Stevens' team. Hassan looked surprised for the first time since Rodriguez had entered the room. "That is not one of our weapons," he said quietly, almost to himself. Rodriguez was thinking the same thing. The SEALs hadn't brought any heavy machine guns on this mission, and none of their supporting units were supposed to be in the area. Someone else was in those hills, someone with serious firepower, and they appeared to be shooting at the Taliban fighters. The heavy machine gun fire continued for nearly 30 seconds, its distinctive rhythm cutting through the night like thunder. Rodriguez watched through the window as tracer rounds swept across the hillside where the Taliban fighters had been positioned, the red streaks of light creating deadly arcs through the darkness. Whoever was behind that weapon knew exactly what they were doing. Stevens' voice came through the radio with a mixture of relief and confusion. "Bravo 6, this is Overwatch. Enemy fire on our position has ceased. Someone is engaging the Taliban positions with heavy weapons from an unknown location. We can see muzzle flashes approximately 300 meters west of our position. Rodriguez felt a surge of hope mixed with bewilderment. The tactical situation was changing rapidly, but he still didn't understand who was helping them or why. Hassan looked equally confused, his calm demeanor cracking slightly as he tried to process this unexpected development. Lieutenant Mitchell's voice crackled through the radio. All elements, be advised, we have unknown friendlies engaging enemy positions on the western slope. Origin of fire unknown, but they appear to be targeting Taliban forces exclusively. Kim looked at Rodriguez with raised eyebrows. Sergeant, should we trust this? Could be some kind of trap. Before Rodriguez could answer, Hassan spoke up. There are no other Taliban units in this area with such weapons. And my fighters would not shoot at positions held by our own people. Someone else is here. Someone who knows the difference between your soldiers and mine. Rodriguez considered the possibilities rapidly. Special operations forces from other coalition countries sometimes operated in this area, but they would have coordinated with American units before engaging. Afghan National Army forces rarely had heavy machine guns, and even if they did, they wouldn't be operating in this remote area without American support. The sound of vehicles was getting much closer now, and Rodriguez could see headlights winding up the valley road toward the village. Whatever was happening with the mysterious heavy weapons, they still needed to extract before those reinforcements arrived. Kim, we move now, Rodriguez decided. Take Hassan and head for the extraction point. Stay in contact and watch for those vehicles. As they prepared to leave the command room, the heavy machine gun opened up again, this time targeting a different section of the hillside. Through the window, Rodriguez could see Taliban fighters running through the grass, illuminated briefly by muzzle flashes, before disappearing again into the darkness. Someone was systematically clearing the Taliban positions that had been threatening the SEAL Overwatch team. Rodriguez, Kim, and their prisoner made their way down the stairs and back into the courtyard. The bodies of the guards they killed earlier were stark reminders of the violence that surrounded them. But Rodriguez forced himself to focus on the mission. They had their target, and now they needed to get him to safety. As they moved through the breach in the compound wall, Rodriguez could see the headlights of the approaching vehicles much more clearly. At least 4 trucks, probably carrying 20 or more fighters. The SEALs had maybe 10 minutes before those reinforcements reached the village. Stevens's voice came through the radio again, stronger now and more optimistic. Bravo 6, this is Overwatch. Unknown friendly forces have neutralized most of the enemy positions on our side of the valley. We're beginning to see Taliban fighters withdrawing from the area. Rodriguez felt another surge of hope. If Stevens and his team could move freely, they might be able to establish a proper Overwatch position to cover the extraction. But Rodriguez still wanted to know who their mysterious ally was and why they were helping. As the 3 men moved through the village toward the base of the eastern slope, Rodriguez caught a glimpse of movement in the tall grass about halfway up the hillside. For just a moment, silhouetted against the starlight, he could see a figure moving through the grass with military precision. The figure appeared to be carrying a large rifle and moving toward a new firing position. Hassan noticed Rodriguez's attention and followed his gaze. "Ah," the Taliban commander said quietly. "I think perhaps I know who your friend might be." Rodriguez looked at Hassan sharply. "What do you mean?" Hassan was quiet for a moment, as if deciding whether to share what he knew. Finally, he spoke. "There are stories in this area, stories the local people tell about a ghost who lives in the mountains. They say this ghost sometimes helps those who fight against the Taliban, but no one has ever seen the ghost clearly." "A ghost with a 50 cal? Come on." Hassan shrugged. "I do not believe in ghosts either, but I do believe in someone who has been living in these mountains for a long time. Someone who knows the terrain very well, and who has reasons to help American soldiers." Rodriguez was intrigued, despite himself, but they needed to focus on reaching the extraction point. They were climbing the eastern slope now, following a goat path that zigzagged between the terraces. The tall grass provided good concealment, but it also limited visibility and made it difficult to watch for threats. As they climbed higher, Rodriguez could see the village spread out below them. The approaching vehicles had reached the outskirts, and armed figures were already getting out and moving toward the compound they'd just left. The timing had been very close. Stevens's voice came through the radio with coordinates for his new position. "Bravo 6, Overwatch is displaced to grid 41S Maryland 12345 678900. We have visual contact with the assault element and can provide cover for extraction." Rodriguez acknowledged and adjusted his route to link up with Stevens and the Overwatch team. As they moved through the grass, Rodriguez kept scanning the hillside for any sign of their mysterious ally. Several times he caught glimpses of movement, but always too brief and too distant to make out any details. When they reached Stevens' position, Rodriguez was relieved to see that the Overwatch team was intact, though both Stevens and Petty Officer Mike Thompson showed signs of the intense firefight they'd just survived. Thompson had a bandage around his left arm, and Stevens' helmet showed fresh bullet holes. "Good to see you, Sergeant," Stevens said with a grin that didn't quite hide his exhaustion. That was getting pretty hairy there for a while. Rodriguez quickly briefed Stevens on their prisoner and the approaching enemy reinforcements. As he spoke, he kept one eye on the hillside around them, still looking for their unknown ally. Stevens pointed toward a section of grass about 200 meters away. "Your mystery friend is over there somewhere. I got a good look through the scope when the machine gun was firing. Definitely a single individual, definitely knew what they were doing. Moved like military, but I couldn't make out any uniform or identifying marks." Lieutenant Mitchell's voice came through the radio with new urgency. "All elements, extraction helicopter is inbound. ETA 5 minutes. Move to primary extraction point immediately." They had their prisoner, they were all alive, and help was coming. But he still couldn't shake his curiosity about who had saved their mission. As if reading his thoughts, Hassan spoke quietly. "If you truly wish to know who helped you tonight, there is someone in the next valley who might have answers. An old woman who sells tea to travelers. The local people, they trust her with their secrets." Rodriguez didn't respond, but he filed the information away for later. Right now, they needed to reach the extraction point and get Hassan back for interrogation. As they moved toward the extraction site, Rodriguez caught one more glimpse of movement in the grass. This time, the figure was closer, and for just a moment, Rodriguez could see more clearly. It was definitely a woman, tall and lean, carrying what appeared to be a high-powered rifle with an advanced scope. She moved through the grass like someone who had spent years learning every inch of the terrain. Then she was gone, vanishing into the darkness as if she had never been there at all. The extraction helicopter arrived exactly on schedule, its rotors beating against the thin mountain air as it settled onto the rocky landing zone. Rodriguez felt the familiar mixture of relief and adrenaline that came with successful mission completion as he helped load Hassan into the aircraft. Within minutes, they were airborne and heading back toward the forward operating base, leaving the deadly valley behind in the darkness. During the flight, Rodriguez found himself staring out the window at the mountainous terrain below, wondering about the mysterious woman who had saved their mission. Hassan had been surprisingly cooperative during the initial questioning, confirming that he was indeed a high-value Taliban commander and providing useful intelligence about enemy operations in the region, but he had remained cryptic about their unknown ally, repeating only that the local people told stories about a ghost in the mountains. 3 days later, Rodriguez found himself with an unexpected opportunity to learn more. A routine patrol had been scheduled to pass through the valley adjacent to their recent operation, and Rodriguez had volunteered to accompany the mission. Officially, he was there to follow up on intelligence gathered during Hassan's interrogation. Unofficially, he was hoping to find the tea seller Hassan had mentioned. The patrol consisted of a squad of Marines and a few Afghan National Army soldiers who knew the local area well. They were conducting a Hearts and Minds mission, distributing medical supplies and checking on the welfare of villagers in the remote mountain communities. It was the kind of mission that had become routine in Afghanistan, though Rodriguez knew that routine didn't mean safe. The village where Hassan had suggested they might find answers was smaller than the one where they'd conducted their raid, maybe 15 buildings clustered around a small stream that ran through a narrow valley. The houses were typical of the region, built from local stone and mud brick, with flat roofs and small windows. Smoke rose from cooking fires, and children played in the dusty streets despite the presence of foreign soldiers. Rodriguez approached the investigation carefully. He couldn't simply ask about mysterious women with sniper rifles without raising suspicions or potentially endangering someone who had helped American forces. Instead, he posed as a soldier interested in local culture and history, asking about the stories and legends that people told in this region. The tea seller was exactly as Hassan had described, an elderly Afghan woman who operated a small stall near the village center. She was probably in her 70s, with weathered hands and intelligent eyes that seemed to take in everything around her. When Rodriguez approached her stall and asked for tea in his limited Pashto, she studied him carefully before responding in accented English. "You are American soldier, yes? You have questions about our mountains?" Rodriguez was surprised by her directness, but decided to be honest. "Yes, ma'am. I'm interested in the stories people tell about these mountains. I've heard there are legends about someone who helps travelers in danger." The old woman who introduced herself as Bibi Gul poured tea into a small glass and handed it to Rodriguez. The tea was sweet and warming, a welcome relief from the cold mountain air.
She watched Rodriguez carefully as he drank, as if deciding whether to trust him.
There are many stories in these mountains, she said finally.
Some true, some not true, some... She paused, searching for the right word. Some that are true, but not in the way people think they are true. Rodriguez sensed that she was willing to talk, but needed to be approached carefully. I asked because my unit recently had an experience in the next valley. Someone helped us when we were in danger, but we never saw them clearly. I wanted to thank them if possible. Bibi Gul's expression shifted slightly, and Rodriguez thought he detected a hint of approval in her eyes. Ah, you are from the fighting 3 nights ago. Yes. I heard about this from travelers who came through after the battle. She was quiet for several minutes, apparently thinking about how much to reveal. Rodriguez waited patiently, sipping his tea and watching the village life continue around them. Children chased a soccer ball between the buildings while their mothers worked at various tasks, and old men sat in the shade discussing whatever old men discussed in mountain villages. Finally, Bibi Gul spoke again. The story I know is not about a ghost. It is about a woman whose family was killed by Taliban fighters 5 years ago. Her husband was a teacher, her children were students. The Taliban said they were collaborating with Americans because they attended a school that taught girls along with boys. Rodriguez felt his chest tighten. He'd heard too many stories like this during his deployment, stories of innocent people caught between opposing forces and paying the ultimate price for trying to build a better life for their children. Bibi Gul continued, her voice soft but steady. This woman, she had been a soldier before she married. Not Afghan army, but trained by foreigners in the time of the Soviet war. She knew weapons, knew tactics. After her family was killed, she went into the mountains and disappeared. Disappeared? From the village, yes. The travelers sometimes reported seeing someone in the high places, someone who watched but did not approach. And sometimes, when Taliban fighters tried to establish camps in certain areas, they would find their sentries dead in the morning, shot from very long distances by someone who left no tracks. Rodriguez could picture it clearly. A skilled sniper, operating alone in terrain she knew intimately, waging a personal war against the people who had destroyed her life. It would be a hard, lonely existence, but it would also explain the military precision they'd witnessed during the raid. The local people, Bibi Gul continued, they began to tell stories about a spirit that protected the mountains from evil men. But some of us who are older, we remember the time before the stories began. We remember a woman named Rashida whose children used to play in this very street. Rodriguez felt pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. Is she still up there? Bibi Gul shrugged. Who can say? The mountains are large and there are many places to hide, but I think perhaps she is. And I think perhaps she has been watching American soldiers, trying to decide if they are different from the Russians who came before or different from the Taliban who came after. Rodriguez thought about the precision with which their unknown ally had engaged the Taliban positions, the way she had seemed to know exactly which fighters posed the greatest threat to the SEAL team. That kind of tactical awareness suggested someone who had been observing American operations for some time, learning their methods and deciding whether to trust them. If I wanted to send a message to this person, Rodriguez asked carefully, how would I do it? Bibi Gul smiled for the first time since they'd started talking. Messages in these mountains travel in many ways. Sometimes a traveler carries word from one valley to the next. Sometimes the wind carries voices to those who know how to listen. Rodriguez understood. In a region where cell phones and radios were unreliable, information still traveled through informal networks of traders, herders, and local people who moved between communities. If he left the right message with the right person, it would eventually reach its intended recipient. Rodriguez finished his tea and reached into his pocket for money to pay for it. As he placed the bills on Bibi Gul's table, he also set down a small piece of paper with a simple message written in both English and Pashto. Thank you for your help. You honor your family's memory. Your American friends will not forget. Bibi Gul glanced at the paper and then looked directly at Rodriguez. I will make sure this reaches the right person, she said quietly. As Rodriguez prepared to rejoin his patrol, Bibi Gul spoke one more time. The woman I told you about, if she exists, she is not a ghost. She is someone who has lost everything but refuses to surrender. Perhaps that is something American soldiers can understand. Rodriguez nodded. He understood perfectly. In his months in Afghanistan, he'd met many people who had suffered unimaginable losses but continued to fight for something better. Some fought with weapons, some with words, some simply by refusing to give up hope. Each form of resistance was valuable in its own way. During the helicopter ride back to base, Rodriguez found himself thinking about Rashida, if that was indeed her real name. Somewhere in those mountains was a woman who had turned her grief into a weapon, her loss into a mission. She had saved the lives of American soldiers, not because she owed them anything, but because she had chosen to stand against the same evil that had destroyed her family. Rodriguez never saw her again, though he served another 4 months in Afghanistan before rotating back to the United States. But he heard stories from other units operating in the region, stories about Taliban positions found abandoned after accurate sniper fire, about enemy reinforcements that never arrived at their destinations, about mysterious assistance appearing just when American forces needed it most. Some soldiers dismissed these stories as coincidence or exaggeration. Rodriguez knew better. Somewhere in the tall grass of the Afghan mountains, a guardian angel watched over American soldiers, honoring the memory of her own children by protecting the children of strangers who had come from halfway around the world to fight the same darkness that had taken everything from her. Years later, when Rodriguez retired from the military and people asked him about his most memorable mission, he would tell them about the night a ghost rose from the grass with an auto-sniper rifle. But he would always remember that the ghost had a name and a story and a grief that had been transformed into something larger than revenge. He would remember Rashida, who had lost everything but had chosen to become someone else's salvation.